Toby appeared in June of 2019. And we are now, of course, looking at each other going, oh, what on earth did we think we were doing? We've got rid of the children and we've given ourselves a dog. This is crazy.
Power to Live More with Joe Dodds.
Welcome to the Power to Live More podcast, all about productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience. I'm Jo Dodds, and I started this show to enable interesting people to share their stories about how they use their power to live more, and by that I mean to do the stuff that they want to do more than the stuff that they need to or should do. It's about creating a life for yourself where you have the energy, health and space to be happy and fulfilled, spending your time as you'd like, whether that be at work, home or somewhere else entirely. That's your choice.
Hello, my name is Ellie Dodds and I'm co-presenter, and today Jo is interviewing Cathy Brown. Cathy and Jo met through the Engage for Success movement, and Cathy was actually our guest on show number 101. Those of you who listen regularly will know that Jo was recently dog sitting. It was for Cathy. Running her own consultancy as Capability Brown, Cathy has a wide-ranging experience across the public, private and third sectors in raising awareness and providing practical guidance to organisations looking to improve employee engagement through many different business models. Cathy engages and energises audiences around business change, leadership and innovation. She passionately believes that helping people find a better way to work can make a big difference to people's lives, their organisations and ultimately to the country. Back to the studio.
Today I'm interviewing a very special guest. This is show 150, and in its honour we decided that we would return and have a guest who has been on the show already and in fact was on show number 1. And I listen to this quite often. Well, listen to the first bit quite often because it has little Dodsy when she was about 8, sounding very cute at the beginning. So I'm going to check now and see whether our guest Cathy Brown sounds as cute now as she did then.
I suspect probably not, Jo.
Well, you might be as cute as you were then, but maybe just not as cute as little Dodsy.
Very true.
So brilliant to have you back with me on the show. It was 150 shows ago, and this will be going out in probably February, I would think. I haven't even looked ahead to see when. And I started the show, I should have looked at the date, but it was like something like 4 years ago, because it's not as simple as one a week, because I had quite a lot of gaps, as you'll know, towards the beginning. But yeah, it's been a while. So yeah, brilliant to have you on. And we are friends, so we see each other quite a lot, keep in touch anyway, so I know what's been going on in the meantime. But start by telling people a bit about who you are and what you've been doing since we last spoke.
Well, I will. So as Jo says, my name is Cathy Brown, and she and I are good friends, and we met through the work that I was doing at the time that I was last interviewed, and that was working for Engage for Success, of which I was the exec director for a number of years. And that was all about engagement and setting up a grassroots movement to get people realising that there's a far better way to work that treats people like human beings. So I left that role in 2018, a little over a year ago, and that was because the organisation changed, and we were a not-for-profit social movement, and in the end it made more sense for the longevity of the organisation to come under the banner of a larger organisation. So I transitioned the two organisations together and went off to do something else, and I've spent the last year and a bit working for a fantastic organisation called the Employee Ownership Association. In fact, Jo and I did a podcast about that at some point, I seem to recall.
In the caravan.
Yes, in the caravan.
In the famous caravan. I should call it Caravan Studio or something, shouldn't I?
You should. And so the EOA is a membership organisation, and it represents companies that are owned by their employees. And very obvious example is John Lewis. But over the last year, since I've been involved, although nothing necessarily to do with me directly, we have welcomed in Lush, we've welcomed in Richer Sounds, Riverford Organics, Aardman Animations, and a number of other quite well-known names. And it's been a very natural fit for me in terms of the engagement work that I've been doing previously. And so my role there was operations director. And that interim role came to an end shortly before we're recording this. And I'm currently enjoying what I like to think of as a well-earned break in between roles. So I've got lots of stuff going on family-wise. I've got lots of stuff that doesn't perhaps get the attention when I'm working pretty much full-time. And so at the moment, I'm going to take an opportunity to just sit back a little bit and assess my life and assess what actually makes me happy about work, because it's something I'm very passionate about, and have a think about what my next steps will actually be.
So to anyone listening, they'll be thinking, oh, calm, that's lovely. But I know that actually, knowing you, that doesn't actually happen quite like that. And already I'm just thinking, apart from family things, you've got 2 lovely holiday travel things coming up, and you don't ever do those by halves. And you've also got 2 separate courses that you're studying, if I remember rightly.
Yes, so I've decided to take this opportunity to start a degree, because of course that's hugely sensible. So with the lovely Open University, with whom I've been hugely impressed, about 8 or 9 months ago, I started their Science and Maths Access course, because I thought I might, before embarking on a degree proper, thought I might actually prove to myself that I could actually do the work. So I did successfully do that, which was great. Was only just off a distinction in passing the access course, which I was really pleased about. So the degree is environmental studies, and that has started again a couple of weeks before we're recording this podcast. And the other course that I'm doing is completely unrelated to that. I decided to do an online 200-hour yoga certification, which so the 200-hour yoga certification is a fairly common one, but this is the first online course, and it's being run by a lady I got to know when I started doing hot yoga over in Lichfield, where I used to live, and so I'm throwing myself into that as well. So yes, and travel and family and all of the normal things that happen that you don't normally have time for because of work.
Exactly, and I'm just looking back at the show notes from our original show, and I wasn't sure that we'd top the combination of zombies and Morris dancing, but I think environment and yoga might do it. Although they're quite, maybe they're a bit on the same side. Maybe you need something more zombie-like to go in there as well.
Oh, I'm sure we can think of something.
So lots happened since, and still to happen, even though you tell me this is the taking things easy, having a break thing. But interesting that you've had that opportunity to work with the Employee Ownership Association, which has been a sort of quite a different organisation compared to, and working with different organisations compared to your sort of main corporate career. And obviously you're looking now at what do you do next. You've obviously got the university course, which is a different thing again. Where are you in the sort of why you do what you do thing? I don't suppose fundamentally there's going to be a change, but the manifestation of that is a bit different to when we last spoke. So tell us a bit more about why you do what you do.
It is. I think when we last spoke, I'd had the experience of setting up my own business and working freelance for a while. And thinking back, 4 years ago or so, I was really just at the beginning of the full exec director role with Engage for Success. So I don't think I've been in it for very long. And absolutely, the last 4 years have changed how I look at work and how I look at what I enjoy out of work. So I'd already come to the conclusion that while I don't mind a bit of freelance work, I'm not actually interested in building up a business. I'm not entrepreneurial at all. And that's actually been a really handy thing to realise. I'm really glad I went and did it. Because now I know that actually it's not something that particularly suits me, and going full-time freelance isn't something that I would consider doing again. And the role at Engage for Success has actually taught me that when you start to look at the sort of executive levels of looking at roles, so logically you might say that I ought to be looking at chief exec roles. Actually, that's not what I enjoy. So I very much enjoy, to some extent, being in charge. But with the Engage for Success role, I was very lucky in that I had an absolutely fantastic board and our founders who very much functioned as part of the CEO role, and I did part of the CEO role. And at the Employee Ownership Association, I've been operations director to a really inspirational CEO. And so my realisation is absolutely I prefer normal work, for want of a better word, so regular work rather than freelance work, but also I quite like being a second in command, and that actually there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. I'm 51 now, coming up 52, well 52 by the time this is broadcast, and I think I can actually say, do you know what, that's fine, I don't need to be the boss, but actually I am very good at sitting between that strategic and executive level, because as you know, I can go out and I can enthuse people about what the topic is, and I can talk with authority generally about whatever space I'm working in, because I like to feel passion and purpose about where I'm working, but also I really enjoy rolling my sleeves up and getting the job done. So actually that balance of the two things works very well in an exec director role or an operations director role, where you've got somebody or a group of people who are functioning perhaps at that slightly higher an outward-facing level. And just to introduce some sci-fi geekery, what this reminded me of when I had this realisation a few weeks ago was a fantastic episode of Star Trek Next Generation, where Will Riker, who is always Captain Picard's number 2, he's actually questioned at some point and pushed quite hard about why he doesn't want his own captaincy. And it's that he's realised that actually he's really, really, really good at being the second in command. And why shouldn't he do that in the best ship in the fleet? And because I'm very purpose driven, I tend to work for organisations where purpose and values are hugely important. You tend to find that the people in charge of those organisations, whether that's the exec level or at the board level, tend to have that absolute degree of passion and commitment and everything else that I find hugely attractive in a leader. So I'm not quite sure where that rambling has taken us, but certainly the last 4 years have given me some realisations about the type of organisation and the type of people that I like to work for, and where in that organisation I can be most effective.
It's interesting, and I think it's not always something people have an opportunity to review, or maybe not so much an opportunity. People don't always take the time to think about these things. What do they really want? What suits them best in their life, in their work, and all that sort of stuff, until they're sort of forced into that situation. And it's fair to say, with the changeover with Engage for Success, that wasn't something that was just internal driven. It was an external force that was bringing you to have to review as well. And it's so valuable to have those opportunities, but we don't often create them for ourselves. It quite often is
we don't and I think we have a real tendency, particularly in a workplace, to think that we have to continue progressing upwards. And for me that is absolutely not the case. I mean, I've never been like that in terms of accumulating knowledge. I very, very much consider myself a generalist and a polymath, so interested in lots and lots of things rather than being a deep specialist. So again, that's always been part of my mindset. But we certainly, coming from my very corporate background with BT, you were expected to be saying, well, I'm going to be the next level up in 2 years' time, and I'm going to be the next level up again. And it's this culture that we get into that actually it's really valuable to challenge in ourselves and say, do I want that? Or actually, am I happy here? And if I'm happy here, then it's not lack of ambition or anything that means I'll deliver the job badly. And so everybody else needs to get out of that mindset as well, of thinking that somebody who's happy where they are, that's great. Let them be happy where they are.
Yeah. I wonder if the way that the workplace is going as well, with sort of flatter structures and less opportunity for sort of pure promotion for our younger people, will make this stuff less of a realization and more of just a business as usual for younger people in their careers. Because I really hope
that's just the way it's going to need to be. I really hope so. I mean, logically, you would like to think that even through, for want of a better term, natural attrition, working culture will change. But one of the things that I think at the moment is still in play is that because, of course, we're living and working longer, we've got people at the top of those business structures and those business chains that have been there for longer than we might have expected them to be there. And so some of that more hierarchical culture is still very much perpetuated as people come into the workplace, because that's what the people at the top are used to.
And so you've had quite a different experience of ways of working over the last few years. which, considering you, as you say, you want to sort of be within the corporate space of some description, but you be able to do your own thing. Tell us a bit about your own way of working, because you're like me, you spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, your productivity or your potential procrastination. You have your personal strategies and such things, which I'd love you to share.
Well, one of the things that was a really useful opportunity for me with the Employee Ownership Association, the EOA, was the opportunity to work in an office again, which I'd not done since I'd left BT in 2013. And in fact, really for the 2 years prior to that, since I joined Engage for Success as a secondee, I hadn't worked in an office in any regular sort of way. And one of the things I often say is that I know that home working on a regular basis doesn't suit me. So I've really enjoyed being back in an office. It's meant travelling to do it. So for the last year, I've had a night away every week. And that was actually really useful in terms of the Open University module that I started off in February. So actually having something concrete to do with that night away was handy. But it reinforced for me that I am absolutely better in whatever role I'm doing if I've got fairly regular contact with people. So I'm not a particularly productive home worker. My partner John works from home 2 days a week these days, and he is incredibly focused, so he doesn't get distracted like I do by the dog or the gardening or the washing up or anything that I wouldn't normally be.
Anything really?
Be distracted by. Honestly, it could be anything. So one of the things that I've been looking at putting in place is we're very lucky in my small Derbyshire town. We've just had a really lovely co-working space open up at very reasonable rates. So I'm actually going to, even when I haven't got work on necessarily, I'm going to book to go up there a couple of times a week, because there'll be other people in the space. It's away from home. And I can sit down and do things like, I'm going to book a day to get my tax return done, for instance, and I'm just going to sit there. I won't be distracted by the dog or the housework, and I will just plough through it. And I know from experience that I will be more productive doing that. One of the other things that working within the EOA was a real contrast to Engage for Success was the fact that obviously it's a dedicated team of 10 people, whereas of course in Engage for Success we have this very amorphous mass of a core team, which is fluid, and volunteers who are perhaps even more fluid, and so that slightly more rigid structure actually I found quite hard to go back to. So I haven't worked in that way since I stopped working on a regular basis for BT, and so having to get used to some fairly hefty processes for a small organisation was difficult, and then trying to say, I'm not trying to be disruptive, however I think that there's a better way that we can do this, and in some cases that more rigid structure was absolutely right and proper to deliver what was needed, and in some other cases I've been able to change the culture of that organisation and make it a bit more light touch and a bit less risk averse in terms of the degree of control, and so. And in fact, one of the employees had sent me an absolutely lovely card when I left about the difference that I'd been able to make to her. And that was because I'd recognised that she was very much on the creative spectrum, which she would need to be for the role that she was in. And she was feeling very, very isolated within a quite orderly organisation, and it wasn't that she was disorganised, it was the fact that, as I often say, her organisation doesn't necessarily look like anybody else's organisation. She knows what's going on, but to anybody who's used to checklists and project plans and is comfortable in that structure, the way that she was working might look quite different, and that was something that I absolutely identified with, because I've had that all the way through my career. So I still use things like Todoist. We will have talked about that on the first time that we did the podcast, and Evernote. So I mean, those are online tools that have stayed with me over a number of years because they've proved their worth. We've looked at some slightly more project-oriented pieces of software recently to help the EOA team, and I have to say Microsoft have come on leaps and bounds. I mean, I'm all Apple, and I really dislike Windows, but the Office 365 wraparound is really good. MS Planner is very good. Teams is very good. For anybody who's looking at coming away from using Facebook Workplace, for instance, as you might well want to do for either ethical reasons or security reasons, then MS Teams is well worth a look, as is Slack.
Yeah.
I mean, very similar types of tools. But certainly the systems that I use to make sure that I am as productive as I can be really haven't changed much over the years. I think they've proved themselves with time, and I don't tend to go and try the new whizzy thing because I've got something that absolutely works for me. So why would I mess with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I say on a regular basis, Todoist is something I've used for years now. In previous years, used to swap and change things around all the time. But actually, what I like about Todoist is you can swap and change things around within it rather than going off somewhere else. So I've just started.
I particularly like their new, so they've just done a new release. And you can now put sections in, and actually that's for some of my slightly more wide-ranging project type activities, because I do like to group my tasks in some way. Being able to put sections in has been phenomenally useful. I think it's an absolutely brilliant upgrade that they've done this time around. Really helpful.
Yeah, and all their filter systems, that's what I change all the time, how I filter my tasks so that it fits better with whatever it is I'm focusing on at the moment. And just the fact that you can shuffle things around and change the way that you use it, stops me going elsewhere, which is good, because obviously, we all need a refresh on our planning when we think we're not getting things done. Cool. A bit about accountability, because firstly, let's talk a bit about the fact that you've acquired a dog since we last spoke.
I have acquired a dog. It was very much a goal for me and my partner. So we've actually had quite a long-term plan, which is unusual for anybody who knows me. We'll think, what? Have you had a long-term plan? John's a bit more of a planner than I am. But the intent has always been, because we lived in separate towns, about 50 miles apart, and we always knew that there was a point eventually where we would be able to live together, and that was when my son reached 18. And so at that point, I moved from Shrewsbury. That was about 3 years ago, and I moved to Lichfield to live with John. And the year after that, his son was 18, and that obviously left us free to do whatever we wanted to do. And we decided quite a long time ago that we wanted to move somewhere that was where neither of us had lived together with other partners. So we wanted to move away from Shrewsbury, away from Lichfield, and go and do something together. And so when I sold my house in Shrewsbury, we bought a house in a little tiny town in Derbyshire called Wirksworth, which is on the edge of the Peak District. And with the eventual plan, obviously, of moving here permanently, of hopefully starting to change our working hours so that we'd got at least some time off during the week. And obviously part of that then for us would absolutely be having a dog, which we've achieved this summer. So we moved a year ago permanently up here, and Toby appeared in June of 2019. And we are now, of course, looking at each other going, oh, what on earth did we think we were doing? We've got rid of the children and we've given ourselves a dog. This is crazy. But he is absolutely wonderful, and we very much wanted to be more active, and we knew that having a dog would drive that, because you have to. It doesn't matter what the weather's like, it doesn't matter what's happening in your life, you've got to walk the dog. And actually we both like it in terms of we do as much of it together as we possibly can. So we will wait till the other one gets back in from work, and we'll walk together in the evening. And we can both tell that the increased level of activity is helping us, obviously. And for all he's a bit of a muppet, he is a really sweet dog. He is really lovely, and we have to think, much as you do with a toddler, we have to think really carefully about how the house is, how we are with him, because they're so sensitive to behaviour, and so us being consistent and calm with him is really important. Luckily we're both relatively calm people, so our only traumatic incident so far was when I left my handbag out and we nipped out to the pub for an hour and came back and he'd eaten a packet of ibuprofen out of my handbag. So a vet's visit and £500 later, strangely enough, I don't leave my handbag out anymore.
No, so you learn quickly. So
yes.
So in the first show you talked about your Fitbit measuring your steps. I know you still measure
Yep.
your steps. Is it still Fitbit that you're using?
It is, although I am having problems currently. I bought a Fitbit Ionic when they first came out, which I think is probably 2 or 3 years ago. And I do like the sort of stuff that it does. So it'll pick up my texts and it'll tell me that somebody's rung me and all the rest of it. But it's currently not charging, which I'm finding deeply frustrating.
Because you're missing all those
yeah.
steps. You have to add them in manually. That's what I taught my
Well,
mother-in-law to do a while ago. She was
I
quite
know,
pleased about that.
I do, or I make sure that I've got the phone with me and the phone is set to Fitbit Mobility or whatever it is, and
so it does that.
Yeah, so it does that. But so still absolutely in the Fitbit ecosystem.
Lovely. I had to teach her to add her steps in manually because she used to wear a bum bag around the house so that all her steps in the house counted. Which I thought was not that practical.
No.
So I started this whole thing where we got onto the dog talking about accountability because I did allude to what you were doing on one of the earlier shows because you just told me about something you've put in place to create some accountability around your habits.
I dread to think, what did I told you, Joe?
Pay money to charities that you don't support.
Oh, yes. Actually, well, interestingly, yes. So a commitment device, if you like.
Yes.
So I still use a modified version of that currently. So I'm back in the habit space at the moment. And what I've been doing is it's a bit of an adaptation of the Gretchen Rubin happiness project, where she took a habit every month and concentrated on it. So what I've been doing for the last few months is picking 2 or 3 sort of fairly standard things that I do but don't stick to necessarily, and trying to embed them a bit further. And so I've got I tend to type out almost like a sort of manifesto for the month. And so the first one was, do your 10,000 steps and check that you're doing them. Actually have a look at about 8 o'clock in the evening and see how close you are, because if you're on 9,000, you could go and walk around the block. The dog would be happy. And so just sort of putting in a little bit more checking. And I made a resolution with that first one to stop taking iPad and iPhone to bed. So leaving them downstairs when I go to bed, a couple of other bits and pieces. And what I agreed with John was I would give him 250 quid temporarily. And if I succeeded 100%, in his view and stats that I measure and everything else, then I could use that 250 quid, preferably for me to buy a new Kindle, which is something that I don't need because I've got a perfectly good working Kindle. But the new one that's come out, I really quite fancy because it's waterproof and it does the whole warm light thing and whatever. So I've got a reward type thing if I get it all right. We've got an intermediate position, which is you haven't completely cocked it up. You've hit most of those things, but you're not 100%, which means that John just hangs on to the 250 quid. And then we had an obviously you have been completely useless position, which was that John would absolutely donate it to something that I didn't agree with. But we really struggled with that because we had to find somewhere that he was prepared to actually donate it to. So it couldn't be something crazy. And so we settled on something that would annoy us both but do no harm, with the British Homeopathic Association, because obviously I think homeopathy is complete woo-woo and actually quite damaging in its worst forms. So luckily I haven't been so rubbish that we've needed to do that, and I have managed to. My 10,000 steps are just absolutely regular now. It was a really helpful thing to do to give it that focus, and in fact the iPad and iPhone in bed, that was no problem either. I did that almost overnight, so that's been going 3 months now. Haven't backslid once. So I take the Kindle to bed if I do want to read. And the one I'm working on this month, which is a bit patchy still, is drinking a reasonable amount of water. So I started with 1 litre rather than more than that. I don't often even drink that really. And actually it's been a really, I'm going to say it's an evolution of the tying the hands to the masts commitment device type thing. But it's been really useful to think about what are the easy things to try and do, so it's more like nudges than massive radical changes of my life. So still down that route really.
Very cool. Have you read Atomic Habits?
I have indeed.
Yes,
I have.
that's sort of some of
James
this,
somebody.
isn't it? James Clear, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
James Clear, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
So some of that stuff's what he's talking about as well, isn't it? So
yes, it is. And there's a lady. We did this last time. We were both talking about books, and neither of us could remember who they were by. There's a lady.
There's a friend of ours listened to it recently, didn't he? And he said,
yes.
He said, did you remember that book? I was like, no.
No. So there's a book around small habits by a lady who used to work for Microsoft,
Right.
which might actually be called Start Small, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
We'll have to look for it now then.
Yeah, we'll have to look for it.
Admitting to not knowing it this time rather than frantically trying to work it out. So, excellent. So that's accountability and habits all covered off there.
Yep.
And it sounds like the health bit's improving then with the walking with Toby anyway.
Well, it's certainly
get a dog, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lovely thing to do. I mean, I think it helps both our mental health and our physical health. And certainly anything you read. So I'm down a route now of reading about how to age well, having read a super book that I know I gave you a copy of called The Age Well Project, which is a couple of ladies with a really good scientific inquiring mindset from my point of view, who are investigating all of the research that is out there around, and the new research that comes out into how to, we're all getting old, how do you do that most effectively? And I picked up some really, really interesting things from it. I mean, some stuff that you know, but you don't really know why you know that it's perhaps important for you to do. And so I'm drilling down into that. And then also some fascinating things where I'd absorbed, so perhaps relatively recent nutritional knowledge, for instance, not realising that it had in fact been superseded by new research. And so getting into all of that has sort of informed again habits that I try and pick up or things that I try and do.
Yeah, it's a really good book. I've read it. This will make you laugh. This sounds like you and your musical instruments. I've managed to buy a treadmill and a little trampoline as a result of reading the book. I think I've used the treadmill twice so far, and I haven't even used the trampoline yet.
Well, you see, I'd been down the treadmill route before, so I managed to avoid that one. But I do now have a cupboard full of various different sorts of green tea.
Well, the treadmill that's very frustrating is that I plugged it in and it turned my internet off. So obviously that sort of defeats the object slightly of being able to do
it does really.
Walking. And so in true Joe style, I've decided actually it's one of my superpowers. One of my superpowers is Googling stuff, finding things out. People ask me so often, oh, do you know how to do this? Or, oh, have you heard of that? Or whatever. And I just go onto Google and I relentlessly come up with searches, change the way I do it, whatever. You're a bit the same.
I am.
Until I find the answer. But some people just assume, oh, I don't know. Do you know the answer? And I always think, well, why don't you just Google it? I just Googled it.
I completely agree.
I think it's superpower. I think you have to get good at asking the right questions. So I Googled it and I found an explanation. It's something to do with things that are being emitted from it, and lots of people had the same problem, generally, not just with this particular. And I found a Belkin adapter thingy socket,
dongle type thing,
whatever the issue was. So I ordered it. It was only like £8 or something. So I ordered it, plugged it in. It worked. And I thought, oh, I'm so good. This Googling, amazing. And then I went to use it finally for like the second time yesterday. I plugged it all in and the internet went off. And I unplugged it and the internet went back again. Now it doesn't fix it. So I haven't even got the energy to start Googling it again yet.
No.
But I have decided that what I ought to do is combine it with reading my business book that I want to read and is really interesting, which I would say, because then it will become a thing on the show notes. And it's also about habits. It's called I forgot what it's called now. Revolution Machine. No, it can't be Revolution. Get it? Routine. The Routine Machine. John Lamerton.
Okay.
My previous guests. And I'm halfway through the book and really enjoying it, but never get around to reading it. So I thought, I could do the treadmill and the book. There won't be any internet, so I won't have any choice, and therefore I'll have, that's called habit stacking, isn't it, if I remember right?
It is indeed. Yes.
So that's the next plan. I haven't done that bit yet. But we'll get there. I'll start getting the money out and finding somewhere I don't want to pay to next. That'll be the plan. So, to ask you about, because I know we both have experience of it, and you mentioned it briefly but didn't say, when you've been staying away from home in the last however many months, you've been Airbnb-ing it, haven't you?
I have indeed.
We've both had good experiences. I've been reading recently some really bad experiences, and people say that they'd never dream of doing it, and they'd always go to a hotel and everything else. And I actually don't. I like anonymous hotels, and I also like anonymous Airbnbs. You're not quite the same. Tell us about your experience and what you think about Airbnb.
Yes, well, when it first started surfacing, I was quite sort of dubious. So I wasn't really an early adopter as such, I don't think. But because of working freelance, what I was finding was I was having to stay away down in London or whatever else it was, and I was having to pay for it myself. And hotels are really expensive. And so I was looking perhaps for an alternative way of doing it. And so I did, my first Airbnb experiences were down in London, so little places quite close to Euston. And in general, what I've found with Airbnb hosts is if you're clear that you want to be left alone, they'll leave you alone. If you're clear that you're happy to chat, then they'll be happy to chat. And a little bit like you, I'm generally, I mean, I'll be friendly, but I kind of like to keep myself to myself. The difference over the last year has been that I've been staying every week in the same place. So rather than just sort of turning up and doing one night and going away again, which is fine, I've obviously been turning up on a regular night every week at a regular time to the same place. And that absolutely does make a difference. And but then we've also used Airbnb for holidays as well. So we've used Airbnb now in Cyprus. And we've used Airbnb down on the Gower coast in Wales. And so you've got all of these spectrums of people who use it to advertise an existing holiday home, right up to the proper people's view of it, which is a room in somebody's house. And we've ended up being Facebook friends with people that we've stayed nights with. That happened to us in Shrewsbury, and in fact they recommended to us a particular car which we then went and bought. So a very strange experience, but then I'm saying a lovely experience with the lovely young couple that I've been staying with for the last year up in Hull, Tim and Rachel. And I would say I just lovely to chat as I come through. Always, if you need a bath or a shower, just help yourself. If you want to use the kitchen to cook your tea, just help yourself. And then always happy to chat if I wanted to chat. But most evenings I'd potter upstairs and I'd go and sit in my room and I'd do my OU work, and obviously then entirely happy to just leave me be, to get on with it. And we went out for a really nice pub tea a couple of weeks ago to bemoan the fact that was it, I wasn't coming up again. And it's really strange, that's well over a year, 15 months of staying every week in somebody's house, and that would never have happened before Airbnb at all.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I tend to not want to stay with people on the basis that although I'm very sociable, I like to be on my own, and the trouble is I'm too sociable, so I couldn't go somewhere and not be sociable. In fact, I'm staying in a B&B, which I don't normally go to either for the same reason, up in York. I was going to, it was when the Ascot was in York, Royal Ascot wasn't in Ascot, It was in York. My friend had a hen weekend and I booked this B&B, and I was a bit reluctant about going, and certainly about staying in somewhere that was less anonymous than a hotel. And this is exactly why, because I turned up, they checked me in, and within half an hour I was sitting in the owner's sitting room, cradling their baby, watching telly with them for the evening. How that happened.
Yeah.
That's sort of why I have to. And in fact, my one B&B thing where I stayed with other people, I had a massive hangover the next day, so I probably shouldn't do that. But like you, I've had some really good experiences in the last couple of years. I tend to look at super hosts because I always sort of think to myself they're a bit more vetted or legit or whatever, and I don't know, I can't remember what the criteria is for them to be one of those things, but I've I just have these sort of visions of turning up somewhere and there being no house there. There's been some horror stories in there. But we had a very good experience in Prague, didn't we? A very lovely penthouse apartment. So
we did. That was lovely. Very cool.
Yes. Please. Before the last couple of questions, what about that sort of learning and developing thing? You clearly sign up for courses. In droves. No, two at the same time. But you read books. Are you still listening to podcasts? That's what you talked about last time.
I do. In fact, I've gone slightly different tack on that, really. So I do less educational, informational podcasts. I do a lot of politics podcasts currently. So I've come from quite a politically aware family, and I've always liked to be sort of politically aware and informed. And I have found that hugely difficult and frustrating with Brexit and everything else that's happening in the UK currently. So I listen to a couple of podcasts in that vein, one called Romaniacs and one called On the House, which is two MPs who go for a pint in one of the Westminster pubs that I know after Parliament on a Thursday night, and obviously drag along various people to talk to them. And that's been hilarious over the last 3 weeks, because they were both people who defected from the Tories. So they started off both Tory, and they're now both Lib Dem.
Oh wow!
Yeah, really funny. But the insights that I get from those I find really useful, and they're all done with a sense of humour as well, which is, thank heavens, given the polarisation and the nastiness that we have seen in this country over the last 3 years. So I listen to those a lot. There's a couple of others in the slightly more, I suppose, I'm not sure if it's the word to use, but perhaps in the slightly more spiritual sense. So we have a really interesting practitioner here in Wirksworth, in our small Derbyshire town, who's been a Buddhist monk for many years, and is very much around helping people explore issues that they've had in the past, to get to a better sense of themselves. And they do a fabulous set of videos that I quite often watch or just listen to on audio, around all sorts of things, working with your inner child and how to stop comparing yourselves to other people and how to trust yourself more, and a huge array of sort of personal growth type topics. So I listen to that quite a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. So last couple of questions then. Firstly, what happens if it all goes horribly wrong, if you have a bad day? How do you deal with that?
Currently, I cuddle the dog, I cuddle John. I've got a lovely selection of friends, both here in our small Derbyshire town and online. I mean, I think I probably said last time, I never discount online friendships as being hugely supportive. So I'm much better these days at reaching out if I'm having a bad day, rather than keeping it all internal. But to be honest, nothing really beats pulling the walking boots on and taking the mutt out for a walk.
Lovely. And that sounds like a nice entry onto the last question, which is about what you do on a day where you're living more, so where you get to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the things that you feel you should do or you have to do. I guess that's your next few months, isn't it? But what's that like?
It is. Well, absolutely. The getting outside, whether that's in my garden, which is about to be massively redesigned, or whether it's with the dog or whatever else. So there's a big thing there about being outside in some way. And we're about to commence a huge building project, which is that last part of that ultimate goal. So we're building John a music studio, and that is now turning into a 2-story building with a meditation garden and yoga room for me on the top. So I'm excited about all of that. I love to do things with my hands, so whether that's cooking, or whether it's gardening again, or crochet or weaving or something with wool. So I've got a couple of crochet projects. Well, I've got hundreds of crochet projects on the go, but I've got a couple that I'm actively working on, because it's a nice time of year for that. And John and I both like to travel, so when we've got the leisure, at the moment neither of us work on a Friday, so we like to take long weekends where we can, either go and see friends or obviously take the dog, the tent, although not the tent obviously at this time of year, and go off and do stuff. And we're very musical, I suppose. So John's a musician, and I still Morris dance. We've found new Morris side to join since we moved. We're getting involved now with more live music sessions and running a sort of community group at the moment called Music Works, which is around supporting the local youngsters, really, either through the schools or through live gigs or whatever else. So working with some friends of ours to do more of that.
Brilliant. Sounds like you haven't got time to go back to work, so enjoy the next few months.
Got to pay the mortgage somehow.
Lovely. Thank you, Cathy. Really enjoyed catching up with you again, albeit we do it all the time, but from a sort of podcast point of view, after 150 shows, great to have you back.
I wait eagerly for number 300.
Yes, brilliant. All this information is available in the show notes. If you go to powertolivemore.com / in this case 150, you'll find them there. And this week I'm just going to reflect a little bit on the current situation. It's just unbelievable as to where we've got to. I'm just recording this just as the schools have announced that they're closing, or rather the government have announced that the schools are closing. I'm really pleased actually, because I've been saying for a number of days that I think that needed to be done just to sort of confirm the severity of the situation, rather than leaving lots of people to sort of make up their own minds, because it just wasn't sort of providing clarity for people. All a bit scary, isn't it? I think this week has just been sort of turmoil, and I guess it'll probably be the same for at least a week or two whilst people sort of start to get their heads around what the new normal is, when we don't really know how long that's going to go on. So I hope you're keeping well and finding ways to get through this. Think about how you can reframe. I keep saying, things are never going to be the same again, and some of the positive things that I think will come out of this are things like flexible working and location independent working within organisations will become much more the norm, or clearly they're very much the norm at the moment for lots of organisations, but much more the norm in terms of business as usual, even when that doesn't need to be happening. I think there's been a lot that's happened in regards to that over recent years, but still many organisations that couldn't quite get their head around it and are actually having to do so now. I've actually been really busy. I'm really thankful that my business is predominantly online, working from home already. Things haven't changed too much for me, and Simon, my husband, is working from home, and obviously Ellie's from home, working from home or at home as of tomorrow. So things haven't changed from that point of view, but actually I've been really busy this week because I've been working with my members, thinking about and coaching them and helping them to think through how their businesses will be impacted, and that their lives and how they operate in this new environment, and how they can shift things, think about what they're doing from a different perspective, and try to sort of, as much as they can, adapt and future-proof what they're doing. So it's actually been really busy. We've had a whole host of calls. We had a Get It Done session this morning, so we got lots of different things done. We looked at target markets for one member. We looked at a webinar that somebody else was preparing, talked about somebody's website and how they're looking at changing their tutoring, their offline tutoring into online tutoring, and how they can do that and how they can communicate that with their existing customers, and also obviously offer up their services for new people, but sort of mindful that I was saying to them, I don't think until after what would have been the Easter holidays people will be worrying too much about home tutoring, because clearly it's unprecedented times, and the children were due to be off for a few weeks anyway, but that gives her a bit of time to get her ducks in a row, as we kept saying throughout the call. So it's been a really interesting week for me this week, in that I actually thought I would have lots more time and get lots of stuff done that I haven't been able to up to now, and actually I've probably got even less done because I've spent much more time talking to people and keeping in touch with people and seeing what I can do to help the people that I have around me. So as I said, hope you're keeping well. If you do need any help, if you want to have a chat, with no obligation to do anything, with me moving forward or anything, but if you just want a bit of support, some ideas about what you can do within your business to weather the storms of the next few months, then please do let me know. Drop me an email at joe@powertolivemore.com. And I've also opened up the membership site with a discount code called Strange Times, which gives you the first month free. So if you're looking for some specific help and you've got some time and you want to do some learning around how to make your business more successful, as well as to get to live more, and you want to join in with the Get It Done days and some of the sort of weekly coaching calls and that sort of thing, then if you go to powertolivemore.com/get-calm, you can use the discount code Strange Times, and that'll give you a month's access for free. And there's absolutely no obligation to continue after that. So you can just cancel. There's no problem with that at all. So, either just give me an email so that we can have a chat, joe@powertolivemore.com, or if you know that you want to use some of the resources, download some of the templates and generally do a bit of work on your business in the next month while you've got a bit of extra time potentially, then please do sign up using that code and then cancel at the end of the month, so that you don't continue as a member, unless of course you want to. So take care, keep well, and again, the show notes for this week's show are at powertolivemore.com/150, and we look forward to speaking to you next week.
Use your power to live more.